Mohammed Aziz and Khalil Islam to receive $26 million from New York City. Elon Musk tweets fake news about attack on Pelosi home. Biden congratulates Lula on victory over Trump-backed Bolsonaro in Brazil. Nearly 7,500 madrasas, including Darul Uloom Deoband, are now targets of India's BJP government. Syrians in Idlib camps collect plastic manure to stay warm in winter. Woman learns a Welsh language to translate Islamic texts. From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana, Siddiqui. Our top story tonight: Mohammed Aziz and Khalil Islam spent more than 20 years in prison for the 1965 assassination of civil rights leader Malcolm X. Now, New York City has agreed to pay $26 million to settle lawsuits filed on behalf of the two men whose wrongful convictions were thrown out last year. The New York Times reports the judge who exonerated them found serious miscarriages of justice in their convictions, city and federal court records. The trial of Aziz and Islam relied on questionable evidence, the Times said. Their exonerations last November came after a 22-month investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. It found prosecutors, the FBI, and the New York Police Department had withheld key evidence that probably would have led to acquittals. The exonerations came amid allegations of racism and discrimination in the criminal justice system, prompting national protests and political debate. 3 days after purchasing Twitter, Elon Musk tweeted an article making baseless allegations about the recent attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi. The New York Times reports that Musk's tweet, which was later deleted, was in response to one by Hillary Clinton on Saturday. The former First Lady and 2016 Democratic presidential nominee had posted a tweet criticizing Republicans for spreading hate and deranged conspiracy theories. She said such theories had emboldened Paul Pelosi's attacker. The article Musk shared was from the Santa Monica Observer, alleging Pelosi was drunken in a fight with a male prostitute. The incident raises questions about how or if Musk will combat misinformation and hate speech on the social media site. In related news, Saudi Arabia's Kingdom Holding Company and the private office of Prince Al-Walid bin Talal will continue their ownership of Twitter shares valued at $1.89 billion. They are the second largest investors in the social media company after billionaire Elon Musk's takeover, according to a statement released by the Saudi prince. Bin Talal shared the statement on his Twitter account on Friday. KHC was founded by bin Talal, and 16.9% is owned by the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund. Saudi Arabia has more than 12 million Twitter users as of January, the 8th highest among countries globally. The kingdom's population is over 34 million. For the 30th straight year, Cuba will submit a UN General Assembly resolution demanding an end to the U.S.'s economic blockade of the nation. United Nations member states have typically condemned the economic embargo of Cuba. Peace groups on Saturday launched a series of nationwide rallies to demand an end to the crippling 60-year blockade. They included members of Code Pink, Black Alliance for Peace, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and Democratic Socialists of America. Rallies were held in New York City, Los Angeles, and Portland on Saturday. Demonstrations are planned on Wednesday in Washington, D.C. and Chicago, and on Thursday in San Francisco. Saifullah Paracha, a Pakistani businessman who was the oldest prisoner at Guantanamo Bay, returned to Pakistan on Saturday, the Foreign Ministry confirmed. Paracha spent more than 18 years at the U.S. detention center in Cuba without a trial. In 2003, U.S. intelligence operatives arrested the 73-year-old in Thailand on charges of having links to al-Qaeda. A review board established by former U.S. President Barack Obama determined Paracha was not a continuing threat to the U.S. His son, Uzair Paracha, was also imprisoned in the U.S. He received a 30-year prison sentence, which was voided 18 years later, with his judge stating that letting his conviction stand was a manifest injustice. A black man who spent 38 years in prison for a murder he did not commit was released in California on Friday after DNA tests proved he was innocent. 69-year-old Maurice Hastings had his murder conviction overturned by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. He was wrongly convicted for the 1983 abduction and killing of Roberta Werdemer. Newly tested DNA evidence exonerated Hastings of the crime and identified a different person as the murderer. The district attorney's office said the real killer died in 2020 while serving a separate sentence for kidnapping and rape. The district attorney's office worked with the Los Angeles Innocence Project to file a motion to vacate Hastings' conviction. Upon release, Hastings said he wants to enjoy his life and move forward. News about the Brazilian election after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
On Sunday, U.S. President Joe Biden congratulated Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for winning Brazil's presidential election. Da Silva beat incumbent Jair Bolsonaro, who was backed by former U.S. President Donald Trump. Bolsonaro, like Trump, expressed doubt about election integrity in his country's system. Biden called Brazil's election free, fair, and credible in a statement on Sunday. U.S. progressives also welcomed Da Silva's election. Roots Action Director Norman Solomon described Da Silva's victory as a huge blow against fascistic politics and a huge victory for decency and sanity. With 99% of votes counted, Da Silva led the incumbent by more than 2 million ballots. A government survey by the Indian state Uttar Pradesh shows nearly 7,500 madrasas are operating without recognition, a state minister said Saturday. The 150-year-old Darul Uloom Deoband is listed among those institutions not recognized by the UP Madrasa Board. The seminary is not registered with the board, but does educational work according to the Indian constitution, the minister said. The Shura Society of the Darul Uloom is registered under the Societies Act, and the seminary operates under the constitutional right to freedom of religion. Darul Uloom Deoband was established on September 30th, 1866. The move is part of a wider effort by the Bharatiya Janata Party government in Uttar Pradesh to ban thousands of madrasas as part of an anti-Muslim agenda. Forcibly displaced civilians in Syria's northwestern Idlib province are collecting plastic bags and manure to stay warm in winter. Hundreds of thousands are struggling to survive in makeshift tents. They cannot afford to buy fuel, wood, and coal for winter. Haldia Ahmad, a resident of a Hijra camp in Kafr Arub village, said, "Our children have nothing. We need winter clothes for children, wood for heating, fuel, and stoves." Many of those displaced kept warm last winter by burning wood, plastic bags, and manure, and will likely have to do the same this winter. However, the fumes from burning these materials can be harmful and cause children to fall sick by inhaling them. The Syrian civil war began in 2011 when the Bashar al-Assad regime cracked down on pro-democracy protesters. The UN estimates hundreds of thousands of people have since been killed and a million more displaced. On Saturday, 2 car bombs exploded in Somalia's capital Mogadishu, killing at least 100 people. The blasts happened within minutes of each other and destroyed buildings and vehicles in the area. The extremist group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack, which killed children and adults. President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed appealed for international medical help to deal with the 300 injured. Al-Shabaab has been fighting the federal government for control of Somalia for close to 15 years. While it controls much of the southern and central parts of the country, its influence has extended to government-controlled areas based in the capital. Laura Jones, a Muslim from the UK county of Cardiff, says one of the reasons she learned to speak Welsh was so she could translate Islamic texts. Jones says she wants to get the Quran translated into Welsh so her Islamic faith can be part of the conversation. The Quran has been translated into hundreds of languages, but there is no full Welsh translation of the scripture. Jones said with more Muslims now speaking Welsh, it's a good time to translate more Islamic texts. She studied the language at school, but said she only became a confident speaker as an adult in 2016. Jones said she tries to express her Muslim faith with other Welsh speakers and on the radio. When Jones was working for the Muslim Council of Wales, she started to do some translations. She has trained as a Muslim chaplain and has studied the role of Islam in contemporary Britain. She's now working on a doctorate at Cardiff University, researching people's experiences during Ramadan. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. It's time for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
Thank you, Samana. United States and Cuba have had a strained relationship since Castro overthrew a US-backed government more than 60, or was it more than 65 years ago? And since then, more or less, US has maintained an embargo of Cuba. And the United Nations, for the last 30 years, year after year, it continues to condemn United States for that. And it is going to happen again in this General Assembly at the United Nations. To discuss Cuba and US relations, we have James Early. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you. A pleasure to join you, particularly on this important topic in our hemisphere.
James Early has visited Cuba many times over 45 years. He is former Smithsonian Institution's Assistant Secretary for Education and Public Service. So share with us, is there any other country in the world which US has maintained sanctions for this long?
No, this economic warfare is what it should be called. The Cubans call it a blockade. Of course, in the context of US legislation, it is an embargo. That is an important term, the embargo, because it requires that the US public look at legislatively and presidentially how to dismantle that. It's not just an ideological factor. And the United States has maintained a cruel, illegal, unjust, life-defining economic warfare against Cuba under the embargo and under sanctions, both by the last president, Donald Trump, and 200 and some odd new sanction additions added by the Biden-Harris administration. This is an unprecedented imperial imposition by the United States on another country on the globe.
So how's Cuba is surviving despite all of this?
Well, the Cubans are surviving, I would say, at two basic levels. The history of Cuba in its anti-colonial struggle against Spain and then against the United States has been a stalwart example of national sovereignty, self-determination, and independence, which is admired even among those who oppose its socialist ideology and its socialist constitutional governance system. And so they are committed to these principles within the context of the United Nations of sovereignty, independence, and self-determination. And it is unparalleled in modern history that they have been able to assume that. As a result, they have had to depend on South-South relations, and they have had to learn to, in effect, be frugal and to, at times, starve with dignity. These are two exemplary kinds of propositions, but that one would not wish it on any other country or any other community in the world. And so those are the factors. Those factors have redounded to Cuban multilateral relations in basically all of the countries in the Caribbean and Latin America, calling for the dismantling of this U.S. blockade and for the removal of Cuba from the terrorist list, which is unfounded, undocumented. Last week, I attended with several other U.S. citizens, including Cuban Americans and Iranian Americans, the State Department desk on Cuba to deliver 10,000 individual signatures and to with 100 organizations calling for the removal of Cuba from this unjust, illegal terrorist list for which there is no evidentiary foundation. The significance of that is that all of Latin America and the Caribbean, particularly President Obrador of Mexico, and most recently and quite significantly, President Petro of Colombia, who is calling for removal of Cuba from the terrorist list, because the Cubans have played a very important interlocutor role in helping to resolve the internal civil war over the last 70 years in Colombia, the heart of Latin American interest in Latin America, with 8 U.S. military bases and billions of dollars over the years dedicated to that. So this is a context in which the world has stood up and said to the United States, you are an outlier, you are an outlaw state outside of the protocols that have been achieved by the community of nations and the United Nations in particular, in which countries respectfully find their mutual interests as well as carry out in a peaceful and respectful way their fundamental ideological and political difference, which there are between Cuba and the United States in terms of governance, notwithstanding the great majority of U.S. citizens wanting to dismantle this blockade and to open up diplomatic relations. The high point of the last 60 years of the U.S. economic war, which was established under the former presidency of Barack Obama and the presidency of Raul Castro, in which they discussed and debated and came to a compromise to re-enter the Protocol of Nations with full process towards full diplomatic relations, which the Biden-Harris administration now really is a rogue state, an outlaw state, standing outside of that construct, and has been overwhelmingly rejected by the United Nations in the last number of votes, and will be so in the coming days when the UN again votes on this United States blockade against Cuba.
U.S. action cannot be just attributed to, in regards to embargo and sanctions and calling it a terrorist state because Cuba is a communist country. What were the other reasons? Because there are other communist countries with whom United States have better relationship. So why Cuba is treated in this particular way?
Well, we must remember in the late 1800s with the Monroe Doctrine, when the United States declared that this was its backyard, and it set up international mechanisms to prohibit self-determination on the part of countries that would not conform to the ideological, economic, and political policies of the United States, and punish those countries, along with Haiti, in which the Western Europeans, particularly France, took a punitive measure against the Haitian Revolution in the 1800s, and has continued to pay French slaveholders for the independence of Haiti, which only was concluded in, interestingly, 2015, those payments. And of course, Haiti has become the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and is in total destruction now as a result of the dominance of U.S. and Western Europe, particularly French and Canadian policies. Where does Cuba follow in this context? Cuba is the second country outside of the United States in this hemisphere that arose to a full self-dependence, independence, sovereignty, and self-determination, defying the policies of the United States government. So the United States has wanted to punish Cuba as an example that you cannot escape the power of imposition of how the United States government and corporate interests would want Cuba to behave. And so it is this little country of 11 million people on a planet of 8 billion, your question is quite poignant. Why is Cuba so punished by the United States? And because it has stood full force against this imposition. And it has been a model throughout Latin America and the Caribbean for this kind of independence and self-determination, not necessarily becoming socialist. That's not really the question. It's becoming sovereign, independent, and self-determined outside of the imposition, the imperial imposition of major powers like the United States. So this is why Cuba has suffered so. I would say a second reason, and very important, that notwithstanding the fact that Cuba is a small country of 11 million people, again, on a planet of 8 billion, it is the largest island republic in the Caribbean with very little natural resources. It nevertheless has become a stellar country, a model country in international solidarity, in biotechnology and healthcare, sharing with the world its 5 independent, sovereign, determined vaccinations against COVID, for example, exporting doctors around the world, even to developed countries. And so the United States does not want to have multiple examples of that. Again, not necessarily socialist examples, but independent-minded examples. And so we're seeing that Cuba, in the context of the family of nations in the Caribbean, the CARICOM countries, basically majority Afro-Anglo-speaking countries, along with Latin American countries, have come together in the community of Latin American and Caribbean nations, explicitly excluding the United States and Canada. Although 99% of those countries maintain bilateral relations with Canada and the United States, they want to be a self-determined, sovereign region of mutual respect and mutual independence, building their relations with the South relations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, etc. We see a dynamic change, and the United States is really concerned that it is losing influence in the region. And Cuba is an example, again, of how countries can maintain their own sovereignty, independence, and self-determination, including those who might choose the route of a plural socialism, not necessarily emanating, trying to imitate Cuba.
You know, you mentioned its progress despite all the embargo and sanctions. And the news says that US life expectancy has gone down to 76.1 year, while Cuba is at 79, so 3 years ahead in terms of life expectancy. So how Cuba has been able to achieve that despite and in spite of embargo and sanctions?
Well, again, Cuba is an example of the ideological and political will of the governance structure to really dedicate itself to the well-being of its citizens, prioritizing education, healthcare. We must recall that the first policy of the Cuban Revolution was to teach a fundamentally illiterate population to be able to read, not only to be able to understand the world, but to be able to articulate and to claim how they wanted to see themselves and actualize themselves in the world. They dedicated themselves to free education. According to the United Nations, the Cubans have one of the best educational systems of any nation in the world. Their young people are scoring off the chart in math and science. They have one of the world's 3 most significant ballet companies. It is most recognized poets and novelists and dance and music. And so this is when public servants commit themselves to the well-being of their citizens. Cuba is a constitutional socialist elected government. It elects its representatives different from other places. It is not a dictatorship in that regard, as the United States would have us believe. And so that it is an example. What if the United States were able to dedicate its public policies to universal health care, which both Republicans and Democrats oppose, and which the Social Democrats and the Democratic Socialists inside the Democratic Party are opposed when they advance policies like universal health care or improvement in the wages of ordinary working class people. So this is another signal area in where political policy has distinguished Cuba, and where the United States, this huge economic power, is unable to muster the political will to provide for its own citizens. Cuba has one of the lowest mortality rates on the entire globe. How is it that little Cuba, with almost no natural resources, is able to produce 5 anti-COVID vaccines? And the United States is lagging behind in its commercialization of vaccine policies. These are issues about Cuba that the United States wants to prevent U.S. citizens from traveling to Cuba to see for themselves of what political will can do. And of course, we are a country with far more resources than Cuba, and just easily imagine what here in the United States we could do, not only for our citizen population, but in solidarity with other countries of the world. The United States has embarrassingly only offered Cuba $2 million for its recent catastrophe in the the refineries in Matanzas. $2 million piddling dollars, when we're spending billions of dollars watching the death of ordinary Ukrainians and ordinary Russian citizens, while we will only dedicate $2 million to a country that has been in solidarity in healthcare with countries around the world. So these are contradictions that U.S. citizens need to address at the ballot box, not just raising our moral outrage, but these are inhumane policies that are killing children, prohibiting children from having access to kidney machines, and the lack. And as U.S. citizens, as U.S. residents, as U.S. immigrants, we should demand of our governance representatives at local, state, and federal levels to join the community of nations again to find mutually beneficial relations, but also where governments think there should be strong ideological and political debates, to carry those on, but in a peaceful way within the context that the community of nations has developed since 1947 in the United Nations.
Well, thank you so much, James Early, for your time. Truly appreciate it.
I appreciate your audience listening, and please act out your citizenship by saying to your political representatives how we should re-enter the protocols of the nations of the world. Thank you.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.